A man saw a boy exactly like him in the hospital. When he asked him who his mother was, he saw, "But who are you?" "Nurse, please, someone help me. I am seeing myself when I was 14 years old. Please help me," shouted Ricardo, calling the attention of everyone in that hospital. Ronnie was a boy who was visiting his mother who was ill. When a nurse arrived, she told him he wasn't going crazy, nor was it because of the blow to the head. "Excuse me, your mother. Could you please introduce me to your mother?" said Ricardo to the little boy, who bore an uncanny resemblance to him. When he entered the room and saw his mother, Ricardo began to cry like a little boy and took that person's hand, throwing himself on the floor completely sad. Ricardo was born into a very conservative family. His mother, although she had pockets full of money, did not go through life squandering and squandering. Instead, she did charity in hospitals and helped the neediest people. She was an angel of flesh and blood for the most helpless people in the street. This example gave her son Ricardo a big and noble heart, but above all, a lot of empathy for his fellow man. On the other hand, his father was an influential businessman. He traveled to many different places in his country, so the family moved to other sites often because the satellite internet company had forced them to do so. One day, good Ricardo came home from playing soccer with his new friends when he found a lot of silence and bewilderment in his home. He saw the maids crying and didn't know what to say. Ricardo ran to his mother's room, and his father prevented him from entering. Ricardo noticed tears in her eyes, so he cried out to see his mother, but his father never let him in. They knew how sick she was, but they didn't know that she was going to leave so soon, that she would leave them like that. Ricardo cried over that he had not said goodbye to his mother and accompanied her in her last moments, but that is how it happened. Years later, Ricardo had become a man, and his father, to forget that tragic event, continued working hard in his company. He traveled a lot and hardly saw his son. Still, the love and connection between the two of them remained latent. On Sundays, they always had dinner together. Ricardo had told his father to stop working because his old age was already very noticeable and they deserved rest, but for some strange reason, his father was still traveling very often to a city near theirs. It was as if he would rather live there than at home, and this was extremely rare for someone as local as him. One day, the shadow stalked Ricardo's father, who confessed a terrible truth while lying in bed and holding his son's hand, revealing an awful truth that made Ricardo's heart break in half. He had been given an envelope with many pictures of a mysterious woman that Ricardo had to look for. The day he found her, the assets would be distributed, and Ricardo's share of the inheritance would be given to him. Still, in the meantime, he had to learn to live without any money. Ricardo looked at the photographs of that woman. Her face was already marked in his mind in an incredible way. He could see her from miles away, and he could recognize her. Ricardo thought about that woman every day. He wondered who she was and why it was essential to find her so that he could receive his share of the inheritance. Nor did he understand why his father had put the words parts before inheritance, since he, as the only relative, would have to be the owner of everything. With all these questions, Ricardo searched tirelessly. A few years passed and his savings were already in the red. He had nothing left to survive, and the cities where he had to look for it were running out. Then he decided to go to the city where his father visited and stayed almost the whole week. Still, when he arrived, the altitude of that city made his breathing agitated, and not enough oxygen reached his lungs. He was then rushed to the nearest hospital. When he arrived, he was dizzy and staggering his body down the hallway. He saw a boy identical to him. They were like two peas in a pod. Suddenly, he remembered all those pictures he had seen when he was just a kid. Then, thinking he was going crazy or being affected by the altitude, he started screaming desperately for help. "Nurse, nurse, nurse, call a nurse, please," he shouted as the boy stood there, positioning himself on a wall in fear of the screams provoked by Ricardo. When the nurse arrived, she said something that shocked poor Ricardo. "This is a boy who comes to visit his mother who is sick. She needs an urgent appendix intervention, but unfortunately, they do not have the resources to be transferred to a clinic in the capital where there are better implements." Upon seeing the boy again, Ricardo's heart beat fast because of the remarkable physical resemblance. But he suddenly asked him something. "Hey, excuse me, would you take me to see your mom?" asked Ricardo. That boy nodded his head and took him to see his mommy, who was still in pain and greatly surprised to see Ricardo. When he saw her, he began to cry inconsolably, took her hand, and told her about all the hardships he had to go through when he found himself without a penny. He had to eat anything he could find to survive. He did not understand why, but now I know. You have my same last name, and I am only 4 years older than you. That is the exact time my father began to travel after the death of my beloved mother. Besides, my father gave me many pictures of you. You're my sister, right?" That girl could not speak of pain but simply asked for a hug with gestures. Those siblings embraced, and immediately Ricardo called his lawyer to ask him to please come by so that they could both receive half of everything and save his sister, which is how it all happened. Ricardo found his sister and a nephew who were identical to him and his father and grandfather. After recovering his sister, he gave her an envelope that his father asked him to give him, and in it was the whole story. His father could never tell him the truth about his other family because he did not want to break his heart. But he said that they came at the exact moment of the grief in his heart that he felt for the death of his first wife. Ricardo did not mind this, for the noble heart that had been inherited allowed him to share everything with his sister, and the two of them came to consolidate as a team for business. His sister had also had significant needs, and from that moment on, he never had them again, and his little nephew went to the best schools and never again had to beg for a piece of bread.
If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.